Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the series strategy gamer, and we are returning to a Let's Play of War in the West. And things are looking good for us. So, we've encircled large parts of the German 10th and 14th army here in Italy as we were able to break through these passes here towards Ravenna. And as you can see by these slightly shaded axes here, this is how much we advanced this turn. So we did reduce this pocket, we did reduce the ability to resupply over here. And we have already started reducing these guys down here very significantly. So I'm looking forward to the next turn over here. But before we go into that, and before we see what the Germans are going to do about that, I do want to talk about a couple of things here. And one of them is going to be the landings in northern France. And the other thing is going to be slightly a little bit more on the air side, because you know what, I do like the historical background here, at least a little bit, and see what we can do. So let's look at our air groups and let's look at our fighter bombers. So one very big change that we've made is, as you might remember, one of the biggest issues is our fighter escort here in Northern Europe. We pretty much had a couple of aircraft types that were not really able to extend our range too far. So especially our American bombers stationed around here in England, they can easily range to Berlin, to Prague, or any of these targets, but for a very long time, we didn't really have enough fighters to really provide good cover. We've got the P40, which at this point is really not suitable for combat in Northern Europe because it's just not got good altitude performance. And then we've got a couple of further types, the P47, excuse me, which is nice, but which suffered from chronicle range shortages, and even now cannot really get much further than the rural area here. So it's really insufficient to provide good coverage for most of the German industry, especially the industry that is most relevant to us, the oil industry. So we did replace and pull in a couple of Royal Air Force squadrons with the Mosquito fighter into service. This is a two-engine fighter. It's built from wood, and it has the distinction of being one of the most versatile aircrafts in World War II. It's pretty fantastic, but admittedly, I must admit, it was a stopgap measure. It did allow us to operate somewhere over here, and I do think that it was successful in that role, somewhat. But it does have a range of issues, and that is, it's really not that suited to be a fighter, after all. It's not that agile, it's not that maneuverable, it doesn't really have good altitude performance, so it's fast, but when you add drop tanks to it, it's not that fast. So it was okay, but now we've got a new plane, and that is the P51 Mustang. That is the plane that I really want to use over here, because these guys do have range. In fact, these guys do have better range than the Mustangs at this point, at least when they are using drop tanks. So that's pretty fantastic, and that is a reason why I want to use more of these planes. Now, I didn't want to change the Mosquitoes to Mustangs because Mosquitoes are two-engine fighters, and therefore there would be a penalty in the training or in the experience of these pilots. So what we did is we pulled off all of the Mosquitoes from the 8th Air Force and put them into a retraining program so that they are going to be used as bombers, so as fighter bombers rather than fighter fighters. That's going to be alright. We are going to pull in a couple of Mustangs in here as well. These guys have been mostly replaced from Spitfire squadrons, since we are now getting a couple of Mustangs here from the Americans. Also, we are seeing that more and more of our squadrons here, especially in the 2nd bombardment group, 1st bombardment group. These guys over here, you can see the Mustangs appearing over here in somewhat larger numbers by now. So I think that's going to be fantastic. We also have the P38J Lightning. The P38 did have some problems historically in World War II, at least in Northern Europe. It was a great fight in the Pacific where range was really important, but it did suffer at the very high altitudes that the fighting did occur over Germany. The J variant did help with that a little bit due to various design changes. I think one of the most important ones was actually adding heaters so that the pilots would have a slightly easier time at these high altitudes. So these are the big changes here. We also got a new aircraft type on the British side, and we should be able to see that in one of our groups over here. So as you can see, most of our groups here are now relatively well set up, in the sense that they mostly fly one aircraft type and not that many aircraft types. in most of these planes. Now, the distinction to that is, can we see it somewhere? I thought it would be one of these groups. Cannot see it? Oh yeah, probably I do need to add on fighters here. Yeah, there we go. So we've got new aircraft, and that is the Spitfire 14, these guys over here. This is fantastically new. That's lovely to see. It's more or less a normal Spitfire with one important distinction, and that is these guys are not flying on the Merlin engine. These guys are flying by the Rolls-Royce Griffin engine, which is a curious example in history, because this is actually an engine that was pushed by the Royal Navy as opposed to the Royal Air Force. It's slightly more powerful than the Merlin, but it did have some issues out at altitude too, and the Spitfire 14 is the first one that did really solve these issues. So I'm very excited to have these guys around. So they have now a two-stage supercharger, and these guys are much, much faster than any of the other previous Spitfires, and I think also a little bit more maneuverable. Let's compare them to, let's say, the Spitfire 8 over here, and just see the difference. And you can see it's almost 40 knots faster here, which is pretty nice to see. It does have a higher cruise speed as well, can climb much better, has a better surface altitude, has not so much endurance. That's the one downside here. But on the other hand, it's much more maneuverable as well. So I think that's going to be fantastic. I really like to have that plane, and that is very nice. We've equipped a couple of squadrons, as you can see, number 12 group of the Royal Air Force. You can also see these guys are supplemented here by the Spitfire 9HF. That is a Merlin-based variant, but the HF did have better supercharger, and I think a specific Merlin engine, number type 70 or 80, I don't quite remember. But again, these guys here are very much built for high altitude combat. So I think that's going to be fantastic, and we're going to use these guys. So enough about the airplanes. Let's talk about the landings. So I've rearranged things a bit. And the reason for that is it is now late February. The weather is, as you can see, it's heavy rain. That means we cannot fly. It's been like that for pretty much the entire year. I think there was 1 week where we could fly over Northern Europe. And that was useful, but really not enough. So where are we going to land? And let's briefly talk about the different alternatives that we've got over here. Principally, we could land along the entire coast, pretty much everywhere. So there's no big constraint from the game mechanics perspective, but the game does model a couple of things. Now, the way that works, to my understanding, is a landing is basically structured in various phases. The first one is the journey from the harbor where you're starting your invasion from to the general vicinity. And the more you path through areas where the Germans have some control, denoted by these little circles over here, the more attrition you will suffer. So basically you want to avoid that. The Germans do exert some control for all of their harbors. So basically areas that are very deep in these German lines here, with a lot of German harbors around here with these Channel Islands. You can see this down here would be very hard to get to. We'd suffer probably a lot of attrition. The second step, and that is the most important one, I think, is the landing or the approach to the shore. So let's say the last hex over here. And there are a couple of specific rules apply, which are very closely tied to the fortifications that the Germans have built up along the coast over here. As you get to the coast, these fortifications will, in a sense, start firing on your fleet. As I understand it, the hex where you're landing does count, and any adjacent hex where the naval task force is stationed. So let's say they're stationed over here and attacking into here, then this hex will count and that one will count as well, although it is at a diminished value. Now, I don't know all of the numbers from the top of my head, but I do know the number for level 3 fortifications, and that is basically when you're attacking a hex that's going to cost you about 8% of attrition, and any adjacent hex is another 2. So basically landing anywhere over here does mean 10% attrition, and that's quite significant actually. But the big issue starts when you're taking harbors into account. Now, when you are adjacent, or when you're directly attacking a harbor, I think there's something like a 27% attrition rate. So basically, only attacking the harbor itself will already be pretty devastating to any naval squadron. I imagine that is basically simulating stuff like German E-boats and mining activities and items like that. So really just this low-key warfare that could really wreck an invasion force there. So the gist of that is you do not want to attack a harbor, and you almost want to make sure that you're not attacking adjacent to a harbor, at least that your naval task force is not sitting just directly across a harbor when they're doing the invasion. So let's see what that does mean. Now, originally I was thinking a little bit about attacking over here in the Netherlands region, but I have to get rid of the things over here. But you can see they've got a harbor over here, they've got a harbor over there, one there, one there. So it really becomes difficult to see where you could land without being adjacent to a harbor, or where you could put on a lot of different units without being adjacent to a harbor. Basically, you can only attack Alkmaar over here without being adjacent. We might accept some things close to that, but it just really doesn't feel appropriate, and we would really have a hard time breaking out of here. This area of the coast here is unsuitable due to the tidal conditions, sort of in the what sea? I don't know how it's called precisely, but yeah, basically this northern German bit. So that area up here in the Netherlands doesn't really work for us. Sort of similar situation down here in Belgium. As you can see, there's Bruges, Ostend, Dunkirk, Calais, Boulogne. All of these harbors basically prevent us from landing anywhere here without suffering horrible, horrible attrition. And some of these harbors have actually been built up to level 4 fortifications, which really, really means you do not want to attack there. And you don't want to be adjacent to that either. Up over here, things are starting to look a little bit better, and the area around Dieppe is actually kind of nice for that. And so is, honestly, Normandy. So this is, of course, where historically the landings did occur, but there are reasons why I'm deciding against that region. But let's talk about that in a second. Now again, over here, pretty much impossible to land. Down here, viable in theory, but again, it does become a little bit hard to find a lot of spots where you could land with all of these harbors being present. It's kind of hard to see where you'd really land. So the next good bit of landing ground, I think, is actually around here, around the area of Brest and the Brest Peninsula. So basically the Brittany region. Does it? Yeah, it does say Brittany region. So yeah, basically the west of the Brittany region over here. And this is looking nice. The Germans haven't really built up a lot of fortifications here. There are not a lot of harbors, and still there is a very good harbor that is close by. So you don't want to land directly next to a harbor, but definitely at some point you do need to capture a harbor so that you can bring in supplies on a regular basis. And Brest is a particularly good harbor for that. Level 6, that is huge. That is really, really massively nice. So honestly, this doesn't look too bad. And I was thinking for a very long time whether we shouldn't land along this side of the coast. There's a drawback. It's a little bit further away from Britain, so we don't have such an easy time providing air cover here. But as you can see, we are building up some of these airfields actually, and that is due to the fact that I want to retain the flexibility of potentially landing here at some point. Maybe. It's just a very nice way. The only, then we've got this area down here. This is starting to look a little bit more dubious, I would say, because it's just so far away from the UK. You can't really provide any air cover here. So yeah, I basically discounted that already. So basically, that means we have got 3 realistic options where we could land without taking too many casualties. Brittany, Normandy, or Picardy. Now, the reason why I'm deciding against Normandy, let's start with that one, is due to 2 things, really. One of them is there's a lot of this Bokachi polder area here, and that means it's going to be very, very difficult to break out from the beaches. And that is, of course, corresponding to the historical realities of the region, which was kind of curiously overlooked in the pre-invasion planning by the Allies. So landing here would be nice, but it would be hard to get out of there. Also, it's not ultimately extremely easy to go for another harbor. Yes, there's Cherbourg, which is a level 5 harbor. That's nice. That's the one good one over here. Le Havre is also there. It's also level 5, but it's across a river. It's kind of difficult to get over here. So honestly, I dislike that idea. There's also the Orne River that is sort of running across this area, which does make it a little bit more difficult for us. Now, this defensive terrain is not strictly speaking only a disadvantage. It also means that the Germans will have a much harder time doing any sort of counterattack. So it's tempting to do that. It really was to go for historical landings. There are good reasons why the Allies did that. So ultimately, I think we are slowing ourselves down too much over here. I think we can be a little bit more aggressive against the Germans. And B, we are having them on the run in Italy. We certainly did a lot of damage against their oil industry. So I don't think we need to be quite as defensive. That's why Normandy is out of the picture. As for Brittany, sort of similar reasons apply. And one of them is I'm not sure we could break out from here too quickly. It's very open terrain. That's kind of good. There are some spots that could be used defensively, but all in all, it's kind of open terrain, so that's encouraging. But it's also a very long way from Germany. This is sort of the furthest away from Germany that you can actually get. That does add hundreds and hundreds of miles to the push on the Reich itself. So yeah, I don't think that is what we're going to do over here. So basically, that's the reason. The other reason is while Brest is very tempting, if they do hold out in Brest, which is a city hack, so that is going to be defended quite well, we don't have any potential to push forward our supplies. Basically, our supplies would land on the shore over here in temporary harbors, which do depend on good weather, and they couldn't be transported off by rail because the rail line does actually not run on the coast over here. So that is why I think in this case Brest is not a good location. That does leave Picardy, and Picardy does have a couple of things going forward. Now, the most important to me is that this area here between the Somme and the Seine River, it's very flat. This is good terrain. I think we have a nice time here if we can beat the Germans to push them back quite easily and push them back onto Paris. Basically, if we came from Normandy, the Germans could use the Seine River as a defensive line. But if we're coming from the north over here, I kind of doubt whether the Germans will be able to defend Paris all too well, because they would almost be at risk of being flanked around here in Champagne. And this is a major rail center. As you can see, a lot of the rail lines here in France do actually sort of converge onto Paris. So if we can cut these lines, basically all of Western France here would fall extremely quickly. So I do like that idea, and I do like to push on them aggressively. And that ultimately is why we are landing at Picardy. Let's look at the terrain in Picardy a little bit more closely. You will see there are two harbors. There's Dieppe itself, which was, of course, the site of the historical Dieppe raid, a very disastrous raid in World War II, which basically serves as the textbook for what not to do in an invasion. And then you've got Le Havre. Le Havre is a much bigger port, and ultimately the one that I think we need to capture over here, because this is level 5, this is level 2, so this is not really that good. There's another one off level 1 over here. Yeah, really altogether not that exciting. We do need to get Le Havre at some point. It has a good rail connection, so that's nice. Getting Dieppe would also be very beneficial to us. Next question is, do we want to land in a small force or big force? Now, there are reasons why you'd want to do a small force, and that is basically, as I said, there's going to be a lot of attrition as we are landing on these sites over here, and taking about 10% attrition, if we are landing, let's call that 12% attrition, if we're landing 16 divisions over here, we will lose basically the equivalent of 2 divisions just during the landing without any opposition of enemy ground forces. And then, of course, ground forces will come into play as well. So losing 2 divisions like that is really going to hurt. So maybe not go all in, maybe go a little bit easier on things. So that's one thing to consider. On the other hand, we also want to ensure that the Germans cannot push us back into the sea. So if we're only landing, let's say, in 2 locations with a very minimal force to reduce our attrition as we are landing, the Germans will have a much harder time pushing us back in, and we'll have less temporary harbors to work with. So what to do? Ultimately, I think I decided on, let's say, a middle of the ground approach. And what we're going to do is we are going to land in various locations over here. In fact, we're going to land on a part of the beach here west of Dieppe and a part east of Dieppe. East of Dieppe, this will be ultimately, I think, between 4 infantry divisions, 2 landing over here and 1 landing each here, and 6 if we're landing all of them, but probably only 4, so that will be probably a little bit more manageable, reduce our casualties a little bit, and still have 2 divisions that will be ready to strike on Dieppe itself, while also providing some cover here against any incursion from the east directly there. So I think that's going to be great. It's probably going to be supported by a power drop either here or over here. A reason for going here would be that we are making it a little bit easier to land on this hex over here, which is currently defended by a full infantry division. So that might be a good reason to do so. The other landings here will be occurring on this coast, and basically we will be landing the 1st British Corps, which will specialize to be busting fortifications along these 2 hexes, and they can then directly move on to Le Havre, at least once they've recovered from the landing itself. And then we're going to probably land another British Corps and a Canadian Corps here in this intermediate area, so that these guys are not quite so isolated, that these guys can strike at Dieppe from this direction, start cutting and threatening this rail supply. And at the same time, of course, we're going to try to land a couple of divisions here just behind the enemy so that they can support all of these landings. That's basically it. Couple of more considerations. We have a couple of naval squadrons here that are going to withdraw. So basically the British groups here, J, G and S, are going to withdraw, which is very unfortunate. But on the other hand, we are going to get a couple of new American ones, Sword, Juno, Gold. I did have to reshuffle these groups a little bit so that they don't lose all of their organization, but hopefully that's going to be all right. Now, the downside of losing all of these guys is that we will be losing their preparation bonus. So let's see, where have we got anyone over here? I think we should have some, right? Yeah. So these guys here do have some preparation points. I did have to reorganize that, so it's not too much for now. But we're going to lose that next turn, and that is unfortunate. And that means we cannot probably land in March. We'll probably have to wait until, let's say, May, late May, I guess, to do any landing if the weather permits at that point. But the good thing, on the other hand, is we've got 2 new groups now. That's Omaha and Omaha Naval Support Group. And you can see the Naval Support Group here has 10 10-inch guns, 12 12-inch guns. So that's very lovely. Util, similarly, lots of heavy guns, 12 in fact. And the SWAT group, I think, yeah, does have 18 15-inch guns. So these guys are going to render massive support. The other ones are not so powerful, but these 3 are. And I want to place them up over here so that they can assist in all of these landings, specifically against these guys. I want to place 1 over here so that they can be deployed against this division. And I want to place 1 over here so that we are sure to land here appropriately and be safe from any pushback. That should cover most of these landing sites with very, very heavy ground support, except for this single one over here. But I think that's going to be all right. That's been a long time without hitting the next phase button here, so let's do that and let's see what the Germans are going to do on their turn. But I wanted to bring you guys up to speed on that, so don't expect the Normandy or, well, Northern France landings, don't expect D-Day basically until at least late April, if that. But we are advancing in Italy, so I think that's going to be all right. Let's see what the Germans are going to do here in terms of flying. They're not really flying that much, and you can see just how much damage we've dealt to the German economy. It's been very selective here in targeting the oil infrastructure in Eastern Germany, but still, I think that was a fantastic choice that we did there. Well, let's see what the Germans are going to do. Okay, they are attacking somewhere over here in... They are basically attacking, well, that's curious, the 51st British Infantry Division. Not sure just how well you can see that, but it's a little bit south of Rimini. They're losing 100 men. It's basically, I don't know why they're doing that attack. It's sort of desperation, I think. And this is not unheard of in World War II, that the Germans are doing really, really stupid attacks So that's kind of interesting to see. They're also closing in here on us a little bit more on the northern line. But I think we're relatively strong over there, so I'm not too concerned. But yeah, as you can see, these guys are down here. And basically moved up a little bit, I think. So we will need to squeeze them a little bit there. But I think it's going to be all right. And by the way, look at all of these German units up there in France. They do have very significant reserves there. And I'm hoping that I can need, well, I'm guessing that they will commit these to Italy at some point. Right, let's see how it looks in Italy then, and how the weather is looking. So, weather over here in northern, yeah, that looks pretty nice actually. So there's only a little bit of cold, light snow, that's good. Okay, so we have got flying weather over Europe, and that does mean we can at least start with some of the preparations there. How's the weather in Italy? It looks, you know what, let's actually look at the weather screen here, that might be easier. So, yeah, it looks like rain in southern Italy, but mostly cold air here. And that's only light rain. Or, well, normal rain. But it's not heavy rain, so that's good. And I think over the German lines here specifically, it's going to be a little bit better. Right, we definitely can start see that these guys here are starting to suffer from some supply issues. We've got large parts of the Fallschirmjägers here and the Panzergrenadiers. These guys are, I think, starting to look like they're trying to break out towards the west over here, which is interesting. We've got light snow and water over here. Don't see any axe that is affected by mud. So that seems to be fine. Gain-wise, are doing fine. So one of the big objectives is probably going to be to clear out the 277th Infantry Division from here and this part of the 224th, because these guys are currently cutting basically our rail supply towards Bologna, and Bologna has at least the potential to be a relatively large supply depot. And as you can see, some of our guys here are starting to see some supply issues. So yeah, I would really like to clear that out and be able to push forward a lot more in terms of supplies. How are our supply lines looking? Curiously enough, we're not using these rail lines too much. Yeah, I think you should be pushing more forward. How many supplies have we got in Rome? 140,000, and in Naples, yeah, Naples does have a lot of supply. It's just not pushing that forward enough. So probably I'll need to reduce the priority there and on Rome, and see whether we can push further our supplies a little bit further. It's going to be all right though, but it does mean we will need to focus on these two guys here to clear all the way to Bologna, and that I think should be okay. Interesting that they are sending in the 12th, the remainders here of the 12th Panzer Division. Part of it is, of course, isolated. So that's lovely to see. And the 26th Panzer Division, which is a normal one, so that's nice to see too. Curiously, they do leave open some of these passes over here. We'll need to see whether we can do something over there. Also, La Spezia here is, we've conquered it, but it's not really well defended, so we'll need to see about that. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the air priority, the air attacks over here, and see what we can do in all of these locations. Maybe against, can we attack Plotzi? Yeah, looks like we are actually in lock and we can potentially attack the industry there, specifically the oil industry around Plotzi. It has still some damage, but I would like to increase that, and there are still some oil fields around that do deserve a little bit more in terms of bombing recognition. So I think that's fine. And then we're going to look at some of the other targets. And you guys can join me next time around. So my apologies that this is not a very active term in terms of what we are doing. But I did want to share the strategy here and some of the deeper thinking that I was using to justify using Picardy as an attack site. So, hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.